Eaten and drunk all they could, they started from the inn, and Boots stood up behind again as their servant, and thus they drove far and wide, till they came to a king's palace. There the two elder gave themselves out for two emperors' sons, and as they had plenty of money, and were so fine that their clothes shone again ever so far off, they were well treated. They had rooms in the palace, and the king couldn't tell how to make enough of them. But Boots, who went about in the same rags he stood in when he left home, and who never had a penny in his pocket, he was taken up by the king's guard, and put across to an island, whither they used to row over all the beggars and rogues that came to the palace. This the king had ordered, because he wouldn't have the mirth at the palace spoilt by those dirty blackguards, and thither too only just as much food as would keep body and soul together was sent over every day. Now Boots' brothers saw very well that the guard was rowing him over to the island, but they were glad to be rid of him, and didn't pay the least heed to him. But when Boots got over there, he just pulled out his scissors and began to snip and cut in the air, so the scissors cut out the finest clothes anyone would wish to see, silk and satin both, and all the beggars on the island were soon dressed far finer than the king and all his guests in the palace. After that Boots pulled out his tablecloth and spread it out, and so they got food too, the poor beggars. Such a feast had never been seen at the king's palace as was served that day at the Beggars' Isle. "Thirsty too, I'll be bound you all are", said Boots, and out with his tap, gave it a turn, and so the beggars got all a drop to drink, and such ale and mead the king himself had never tasted in all his life. So next morning, when those who were to bring the beggars their food on the island came rowing over with the scrapings of the porridge pots and cheese parings, that was what the poor riches had, the beggars wouldn't so much as taste them, and the king's men fell to wondering what it could mean. But they wondered much more when they got a good look at the beggars, for they were so fine the guard thought they must be emperors or popes at least, and that they must have rowed to a wrong island. But when they looked better about them, they saw that they were come to the old place. Then they soon found out it must be he whom they had rowed out the day before who had brought the beggars on the island all this state and bravery. And as soon as they got back to the palace, they were not slow to tell how the man, whom they had rowed over the day before, had dressed out all the beggars so fine and grand that precious things fell from their clothes. And as for the porridge and cheese we took, they wouldn't even taste them, so proud have they got, they said. One of them, too, had smelt out that the lad had a pair of scissors which he cut out the clothes with. When he only snips with those scissors up in the air, he snips and cuts out nothing but silk and satin, said he. So when the Princess heard that, she had neither peace nor rest till she saw the lad and his scissors that cut out silk and satin from the air. Such a pair was worth having, she thought, for with its help she would soon get all the finery she wished for. Well, she begged the king so long and hard he was forced to send a messenger for the lad who owned the scissors, and when he came to the palace the Princess asked him if it were true that he had such and such a pair of scissors, and if he would sell it to her. Yes, it was all true he had such a pair, said Boots, but sell it he wouldn't, and with that he took the scissors out of his pocket and snipped with them in the air till strips of silk and satin flew all about him. "Nay, you must sell me those scissors", said the Princess. "You may ask what you please for them, but have them I must." No, such a scissors he wouldn't sell at any price, for he could never get such a pair again. and while they stood and haggled for the scissors, the Princess had time to look better at Boots, and she too thought with the innkeepers' wives that she had never seen such a handsome fellow before. So she began to bargain for the scissors over again, and begged and prayed Boots to let her have them. He might ask many, many $100 for them, 'twas all the same to her, just so she got them. "No, sell them I won't", said Boots, "but all the same, if I can get leave to sleep one night on the floor of the Princess' bedroom, close by the door, I'll give her the scissors. I'll do her no harm, but if she's afraid, she may have 2 men to watch inside the room." Yes, the Princess was glad enough to give him leave, for she was ready to grant him anything, if she only got the scissors. So Boots lay on the floor inside the Princess' bedroom that night, and 2 men stood watch there too. But the Princess didn't get much rest after all, for when she ought to have been asleep, she must open her eyes to look at Boots, and so it went on the whole night. If she shut her eyes for a minute, she peeped out at him again the next, such a handsome fellow he seemed to her to be. Next morning Boots was rowed over to the Beggar's Isle again, but when they came with the porridge scrapings and cheese parings from the palace, there was no one who would taste them that day either, and so those who brought the food were more astonished than ever. But one of those who brought the food contrived to smell out that the lad who had owned the scissors owned also a tablecloth, which he only needed to spread out, and it was covered with all the good things he could wish for. So when he got back to the palace, he wasn't long before he said, "Such hot joints and such custards I never saw the like of in the king's palace." And when the Princess heard that, she told it to the king, and begged and prayed so long that he was forced to send a messenger out to the island to fetch the lad who owned the tablecloth. And so Boots came back to the palace. The Princess must and would have the cloth of him, and offered him gold and green woods for it, but Boots wouldn't sell it at any price. "But if I may have leave to lie on the bench by the Prince's bedside tonight, she shall have the cloth. But if she's afraid, she is welcome to set 4 men to watch inside the room." Yes, the Princess agreed to this, so Boots lay down on the bench by the bedside, and the 4 men watched. But if the Princess hadn't much sleep the night before, she had much less this, for she could scarce get a wink of sleep. There she lay wide awake, looking at the lovely lad the whole night through, and after all the night seemed too short. Next morning Boots was rowed off again to the Beggar's Island, though sorely against the Prince's will, so happy was she to be near him. But it was past praying for, to the island he must go, and there was an end of it. But when those who brought the food to the beggars came with the porridge scrapings and cheese parings, there wasn't one of them who would even look at what the king sent, and those who brought it didn't wonder either, though they all thought it strange that none of them were thirsty. But just then one of the king's guards smelled out that the lad who owned the scissors and the tablecloth had a tap besides, which, if one only turned it a little, gave out the rarest drink, both ale and mead and wine. So when he came back to the palace, he couldn't keep his mouth shut this time any more than before. He went about telling high and low about the tap, and how easy it was to draw all sorts of drink out of it. And as for that mead and ale, I've never tasted the like of them in the king's palace. Honey and syrup are nothing to them for sweetness. So when the Princess heard that, she was all for getting the tap, and was nothing loath to strike a bargain with the owner either. So she